And I just believe over time, Bitcoin will converge toward the S&P times 2 and, 50% more volatility in the S&P and 2 times performance. Or if the S&P, gives you 12% a year, then Bitcoin ought to be 20% a year.
Michael Saylor has dedicated 4 years to exploring Bitcoin and is convinced that we're only beginning to tap into its potential. He envisions a future where Bitcoin becomes the cornerstone of the global financial system, revolutionizing how we store and transfer wealth over the next 2 decades. Saylor predicts that Bitcoin adoption will not only surge among institutions, but also extend to entire nations. If you're curious about Bitcoin's trajectory and its vast possibilities, this is a conversation you should not to miss.
MicroStrategy is up 964% since August 10th, 2020. NVIDIA is up 934%. So we're still outperforming all of the 500 S&P. NVIDIA is the #1 performer in the S&P. Bitcoin's up 387%. Microsoft, Tesla, Google, they're all up like 100%ish. And I keep track of all the various asset classes since we got into this, and that's also very interesting. The S&P is up 66%, so Bitcoin is like 6x. Bitcoin is 388 versus S&P 66, and gold's up 25%, and silver is up 3%, and bonds are down 16%. Yeah, so the interesting thing, of course, is no one would have thought that MicroStrategy could outperform all 500 members of the S&P 500. The only way to beat Bitcoin is more Bitcoin, right? And so that's why every time people offer you, they pitch you all these business ideas, right? And they're like, well, do you want to invest in this business or that business, or do you want to invest in this real estate? And I say, well, Bitcoin's up like 46% ARR every year for the past 4 years. So and that varies, but anywhere from 45 to 55% is the ARR for Bitcoin. So I think, okay, so 50% is my risk-free return. So are you going to give me a proposition which is risk-free better than 50%? And of course, no one's got a proposition that's risk-free better than 50%. So then the question is, well, how the heck are you going to beat better than Bitcoin? And the answer is the only good idea is borrow a bunch of money for 5% and buy Bitcoin with it. If you can borrow money for 0% or 1 or 5 or 10% and you're buying Bitcoin and it's returning 40 or 50%, then that's a good idea. So I think Bitcoin's a good idea. I think different ways to securitize or lever Bitcoin. Some are bad ideas, like, for example, trading 20x leverage on Binance on Saturday night. That's not a good idea. Trading on FTX, on crypto exchanges with like mark-to-market massive leverage is not a good idea. But, if you can take a 30-year mortgage at 3% interest and buy Bitcoin with it, that's a good idea. Like right now, the ratio is like 46% for Bitcoin versus 12 or 13% for the S&P. So it's like 3.5x performance, and it's like 2.5 vol. So the Sharpe ratio is higher, right? There's a higher Sharpe ratio of the S&P. The performance is much higher. And I just believe over time, Bitcoin will converge toward the S&P times 2 and, 50% more volatility in the S&P and 2 times performance. Or if the S&P, gives you 12% a year, then Bitcoin ought to be 20% a year. And the 24 model is a 21-year model. And my base case is 29% ARR for the next 21 years. And at 29% ARR, you end up hitting $13 million of Bitcoin in 21 years. So that being the case, coming back to every pitch I get, okay, well, you have a pitch. Can you guarantee me 29% ARR risk-free? And another way to say it is, that's the risk-free rate. So can you give me 39% with no additional capital required for the next 21 years? And if so, it's still not a good idea because it's a distraction, right? It's still a distraction. I'm taking risk, but it's maybe an interesting idea. But of course, as soon as you set that as the cost of capital, 29% risk-free. I mean, the risk-free fiat rate right now is 5%, right? Or actually after tax, really the risk-free rate has got to be the after-tax bond yield. So maybe it's 3%. So it's 3% if you think conventionally in fiat terms. But if you you're thinking Bitcoin terms, it's 29%. For me, you can have a different forecast, but it's very clarifying, right? Because as soon as you actually set that, you think there's really nothing that interesting to me other than what's interesting is companies that can raise capital to buy Bitcoin and intelligent leverage ideas, like raise $1 billion for 0% interest and buy Bitcoin with it for 7 years. Like those ideas are interesting to me, but there has to be Bitcoin on one side of the idea, and the other side of the idea needs to be an arbitrage of the extremely cheap fiat interest rates. There'll be things like that, but ultimately, clearly Bitcoin is global capital and it's the best asset. So we think it'll grow the fastest. And that model, my base case there is 0.1% of the wealth in the world growing to 7% of the wealth in the world. But go ahead from there, with the caveat that you're working with my base case and you can have your own. It's everybody can have their own assumptions. I think that Bitcoin is not up against that. I think that Bitcoin is competing with all assets. It's clearly demonetizing gold. It's also an alternative to real estate. It's also an alternative to equity. Bitcoin is not just a competition against currency. And you can argue, for example, in the United States, it's absolutely not a competition against currency. In the United States, people aren't buying Bitcoin in lieu of holding dollars. There's no one with capital to invest that hasn't invested in dollars. I mean, every investor in the world has their capital invested in the stock market, primarily in equity or real estate, right? Otherwise, some people might be invested short-term for bonds, but wealthy people in Europe and the United States aren't choosing between moving from US dollars to Bitcoin, right? They're choosing to not buy a building or not buy land or to sell their Nvidia stock to buy Bitcoin. So those comparisons really are pretty important to people in the Western world. Given the fact that my advice, if you're a Bitcoin maximalist or a Bitcoiner, is you shouldn't be investing in anything other than Bitcoin, right? I mean, Bitcoin you've got an answer. There's one winner. Everybody else is a loser, right? And so the question is, are they going to lose big or lose small? And if you came to me and said, oh, I'm going to find a strategy to short the bond market, I would say, I don't suggest that either. You might lose your shirt. So I don't know how to short, or I don't know it's very wise to be shorting most of these things. That Bitcoin can win and the world doesn't necessarily have to turn upside down, right? But when Bitcoin is the global monetary asset or the global monetary index, it still may not be as big as equity capital. It's just going to become much, much more material than gold and much more useful than gold. The dynamic between all the rest, it's a function of, are states running deficits or not, and how do they handle their issues? And this is an optimistic forecast. If you come up with a pessimistic forecast, is the only thing that's left is Bitcoin, right?
Michael Saylor has been sharing some remarkable insights. So far, we've seen how Bitcoin has outperformed leading S&P 500 stocks like Nvidia, Microsoft, and Tesla, achieving an astonishing 388% gain since 2020. Saylor's in-depth analysis reveals that Bitcoin isn't just a competitor to gold, it's also challenging real estate, bonds, and equities, offering a fresh perspective on the future of finance. He has already made a compelling argument for why Bitcoin's risk-adjusted returns are unparalleled. Stick around, as the next segment is where he lays out the real strategy for Bitcoin's future, and you definitely won't want to miss it.
If I generate $1 billion a month, a big tech company, I can buy treasury bills, probably US treasuries short dated, or I can buy my stock back, or I can buy Bitcoin. And as a practical matter, I don't really think there's that much else you could do. Oh, you could dividend out your cash flow, right? And so, those are really your choices for the most part. And that's what the big tech companies do. So the interesting question is, at what rate do I go from buying my stock back, where I'm basically capitalizing my equity, or do I buy the treasury bill, which is capitalizing sovereign debt, or do I go to buy Bitcoin, which is digital capital, capitalizing in Bitcoin? And that's a regulatory issue, and that to a certain degree, and that's also an issue of corporate finance doctrine. Like, when will business schools start to teach CFOs that they should take all of their cash flows and buy Bitcoin with them, or half their cash flows and buy Bitcoin with them? And if that changes, then Bitcoin monetizes much faster. I guess my point is, I don't want to be a doomer like Bitcoin good, everything else bad, because the truth is, you could say Bitcoin good, equity bad, and bonds bad. But if I actually back the bonds with Bitcoin, and if I back the currency with Bitcoin, and if I back the equity with Bitcoin, then they're all going up, right? So it's like just Bitcoin better, and everything else is actually going to grow. And that's the argument for Bitcoin just makes the world a better place, right? It's the constructive, cheerful, progressive, grow out of your own problems with a good technology, vision, as opposed to, this nation is going to melt down its currency and its banks are going to melt down and we're all just going to jump on a lifeboat. We're still going to have hyperinflation in some countries, right? Like, I don't think I'm not realistically thinking I can stop that. I think that there's going to be some, we've got this 7%, currency growth in the US dollar over about 100 years. Will it get better? Will it get worse? Will it stay the same? My base case is it's about the same, right? It's not better. It's not worse. If it gets better, the optimistic case is Bitcoin backs the dollar and Bitcoin introduces rationality in the political process in the Western world, and we decrease that. But that's above my pay grade. So what happens with the dollar and the Chinese monetary policy and Russian monetary policy and U.S. monetary policy and Euro monetary policy? Those are all things that other people have control over, and none of my actions are predicated upon the world dramatically changing in any of those ways. It may, if it does, may be okay, but I really think that if you're looking for a categorical evil, the categorical evil is people can't buy Bitcoin. The failure of Bitcoin, the blocking you from owning Bitcoin, that's the evil. If every CFO simply capitalizes their company on Bitcoin, if half of your enterprise value is Bitcoin and the other half is your operation, if Bitcoin goes up 25 or 30% a year, doesn't the half of your enterprise also go up by 30% a year? So you can see that if equities capitalize on Bitcoin, there'll be a convergence over time. And the law of large numbers says that Bitcoin's not going to grow 4x this other large pool. It's going to grow 3.5 and 3.2. And I don't think it becomes exactly the same because Bitcoin is more efficient. My model, I've said before, is like, I feel like, if you look out in the indefinite horizon, if the money supply or currency in dollars expands at 7-8% a year, and if you start seeing the S&P index expanding at that amount or that amount plus, it'll either be that amount or that amount plus 2 or 3%. If that's what happens, then Bitcoin should be growing 8-10% faster than that, or 8% faster with more volatility. But you can imagine a world where Bitcoin is 20 vol, 20 ARR, and the S&P is 12 vol, 12 ARR, and the currency supply is 8% expanding. And of course, again, that's the bear case for equity, is that equities underperform the currency supply.
Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am back with another great video.
2 number 3 number 4 number like करके जाना bro, like करके.
In this video,
like करके जाना bro.
Michael Saylor has discussed about Bitcoin. He says Bitcoin is very good assets as compared other gold, bond and real estate, something else. He is a crypto investor. Michael Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy company, and he is a real investor of cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin. Guys, if you like Bitcoin related content, then you can subscribe my channel and watch my every video, because I upload this type of cryptocurrency related content every day. So guys, I hope all of guys will enjoy this video. Guys, please subscribe my channel. I will back with another great video in next. Basically, I upload crypto related content in which millionaire investors interview podcast I have brings for you. So guys, subscribe my channel and keep watching. Now I am playing a game which name is BGMI. I am playing this game with my other random teammates. Let's see what's happening in the match. Basically, I am not a pro gamer. I am a noob gamer, but I can't fight weirdly. I don't get any gun still. Let's watch what's happening in the match. Basically, if you like PUBG related content, then you can subscribe my channel. If you are a crypto lover or crypto investor, then you should subscribe my channel. So guys, please subscribe my channel. I will back with another video. Now I am going to end this video. I'll back with another great new Bitcoin related content. Thank you for watching until the end.